Hello, my amazing Algebra Half students. This is Mrs. A, and I love math. And today, we're working on lesson 107 in our edition 2 Saxon Blue book, or lesson 108 in our edition 3 Saxon Blue book, depending on which one you're in. We're talking about percent as a rate. And we all know, we've learned before, that fractions, decimals, and percents all describe a part of a whole. So we can look at 1/5 as a fraction, as a percent, as a decimal, it is 0.2 or 0.2. And as a percent, it's 20%. And we can see that they're all equal. If we take 1/5 of 40, it's 8. If we multiply 0.2 times 40, it's 8. And if we take 20% of 40, it's 8. So we can see that these are all the same quantity. Here are some equations that we can use for percent. We've used these before. P over 100 times of is equal to the is word. P over 100 is equal to the is word over the of word. I usually just follow the word problem, and everywhere I see is, I put an equal sign. So the is word is the equal sign, and the of is a multiplication. And then I just write out the equation, and it's already in the correct form. We can also use a rate, which is the decimal equivalent of the percent. Rate is the percent divided by 100. So rate times of equals is. So those are 3 equations that you could use, or you can use my little trick, and everywhere you see the word is, you put an equal sign, and everywhere you see the word of, you put a times. You'll see me use that method most. All right, so here's our first example. 20% of what number equals 160? So again, I like to just take every time it says of, and I will replace it with a time sign. Every time they say is, I will replace it with an equal sign. And if they use what number, I will usually just replace that with something like n, because n is a good variable for what number. So here we go, 20%. Now I can write 20% as 20%, or I could write 20% as 1/5, or I could write 20% as 0.2. So 20% of, so I'm going to replace that with the time sign. What number, I'm going to replace that with an n. Equals, I'll replace that with the equal sign, 160. So I don't really need any kind of equation because I'm making my own equation as I just read the word problem. So now we're trying to find out what n is. So I need to get rid of the 20%. So I'm going to go ahead and write the 20% as a decimal or a fraction. So 20% would be 20 over 100 as a fraction, which would be 2/10 when I simplify it, which is the same thing as 1/5. So we'll take the 1/5 times n equals 160. So now I want the n by itself. What if I just multiply this side by 5 and multiply this side by 5 as well? Won't the 5 and the 1/5 cancel each other out, and I get n all by itself? And n is 160 times 5, and 160 times 5 is 800. So the number is 800. And that is all there is to it. Here is the next example. What percent of 40 is 120. So now, when we're doing what percent, very often I will write P over 100. What percent? So 20% would be 20 over 100. So what percent of, there's my time sign, 40 is, there's my equal sign, 120. Easy. So now we're trying to find the P. So notice that I have a 100 and a 40 that I really need to get rid of so that I get my P by itself. What if I just multiply both sides by 100? Then wouldn't I get rid of the P? So we're going to multiply by 100. And then over here on this side, we're going to also multiply by 100. So now let's do that, and then we'll come back and finish the rest. Won't this 100 and that 100 go away? And we're going to get P times 40 on the left-hand side equals 120 times 100. Remember, when we multiply by 100, we add 2 zeros to the number. So 1, 2, 0, 0, 0. We either add 2 zeros or move the decimal 2 places to the right. Since the decimal is at the end, I just add 2 zeros. So now all we have to do to finish and get P by itself is divide by 40 on the left and divide by 40 also on the right. So now this cancels and we get P equals, now look at this, this is pretty cool. The zeros cancel. And the 12 divided by the 4 is a 3. So we wind up with P is equal to 300. So P equals 300%. Now let's think about that for a minute. 300% is multiplying by 3. And 3 times 40 is 120. Okay, so here I wrote the 300% as 300%, 300%, which remember will wind up being just 3. So here we had it written as a percent, as a fraction, and as a decimal. But the decimal is what? 3.0. All right, so here, next and last example. 20% of 400 is what number? Oh, well, this one's easy because 20% we can write as 20% of, we write as times. 400 is what number? On this one, we only have to perform the math. 20% of 400. Well, 20% is the same thing as 20 over 100. Now, I'm going to leave it like that for just a minute because that's a very easy form to calculate it in. Look, 400 is here, and that 400 is over 1. 400 and the 100 will cancel with a 4, and our last step is 20 times 4 is 80, so 80 is equal to n. Okay, so now we're ready to do our practice problems. 30% of what number is 63? Now I want you to remember, of is the same thing as times, is the same thing as equals, and we can write our what number as the letter n. So I want you to go and try to do it by yourself and then come back and look and see if you got it right. Pause your video. Okay, so we have 30%. We're going to write as 30% of is times. What number is n? Is equal 63. There's your equation. So now we're trying to get rid of the 30%. So why don't we just go ahead and write it first as a decimal. So 30%, remember to take off the percent sign, we move the decimal 2 places to the left. So 30% is 30 or 0.3. So now all we have to do is divide both sides of the equation by 0.3, divide by 0.3. That's going to cancel and leave our n all by itself. Okay, so now we're going to divide 63 by 0.3. Remember, when we have a decimal in our divisor, it's easiest if we will multiply by 10 and multiply by 10 to clear the decimal out. So now I've got 630 divided by 3, which I can do in my head. 6 divided by 3 is 2, 1, 0. So the number is 210. Here is our second practice problem. Okay, what percent of 4 is 80? So I want you to copy it down and pause your video. See if you can get it right by yourself. Okay, so what percent we will write as P over 100. What percent of is our times, 4 is our equal sign, and 80. So now we need to get P by itself. So here I showed you how to do it in the last one, but let's go ahead and do it a little differently this time because it's very flexible. Okay, so instead we're just going to put the 4 over the 1 here, and we're going to cancel the 4 and the 100, and we're going to get 25. So now we have P over 25. This is completely gone now. P over 25 is 80. So now in one step, I can just multiply by 25 on this side and 25 on this side. This 25 is going to cancel that 25. And now the only thing that's over here is my P for what percent. And then 80 times 25. So 80 times 25 is, remember, 4 25s is 100. So 8 25s is 200. And then I tack on the extra 0. So 2,000 should be my answer. Okay, so 2,000%. Now let's check it. Let's put 2,000%. And remember, that's just 20. 20 times 4 is 80. So that makes good sense, doesn't it? This is the last problem on our practice set. Then you need to go do your homework, right? So what percent, again, we can write P over 100 of times 400 is equal 0.8. Oh, this one's pretty easy because look, it's already set up to cancel very nicely. So we have 4 times P is equal to 0.8. Let's get rid of the 4 by just dividing this side by 4. And we can either divide the whole thing by 4 or we could multiply the whole thing by 1/4 and multiply over here by 1/4. Okay, so now the 4 and the 4 cancel. We end up with nothing but a P over here. And then we're going to say, okay, we have 0.8 divided by 4, which is going to end up being 0.2. Okay, so we have 0.2%. 0.2%. Okay, so let's check it. 0.2% times 400 is 0.8. Okay, so remember the 100 on the bottom and the 400, that's going to cancel, and we get 0.2 times 4 is 0.8, and it's right. And we are done with lesson 107, 108, depending on which book we're in. And this is Mrs. A, and may God bless your day.